The lights of the CNN debate stage cast a sharp glow across the room, making every glance, every smirk, and every shift in posture feel like a performance in itself. At center stage stood Gavin Newsom, the polished governor of California, famous for his slick style and smooth delivery. He wore a confident half-smile, the kind that suggested he'd already decided how the night would go. Opposite him sat J.D. Vance, Ohio senator, younger, hungrier, and carrying with him the grit of America's heartland. Where Newsom embodied coastal liberalism, Vance represented working-class America, the so-called flyover states that had long felt dismissed by the elites. The air was thick with anticipation. Commentators had billed the night as the clash of cultures, California dreams versus Ohio roots. The moderators wasted no time diving in. One of them leaned forward and asked, "Governor Newsom, Senator Vance has spoken often about his working-class upbringing, about the struggles his family faced in Middletown. Do you believe those experiences prepare him for national leadership?" Newsom's smile widened. He leaned casually on his podium, his tone smooth but edged with condescension. "Look, I respect anyone who's worked hard to get where they are," he said, pausing for effect. "But let's be honest. Running a country isn't the same as growing up in a struggling town. We need vision, leadership, sophistication. You don't learn that fixing cars in Ohio." The crowd gave a mixture of gasps and laughter. The jab was unmistakable, an attack on Vance's roots. Cameras zoomed in on Vance, capturing the flash of fire in his eyes. He didn't immediately jump to respond. Instead, he let the weight of Newsom's words settle in the room, his silence commanding attention. Finally, Vance leaned toward the microphone, his voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the tension. "Governor, I may not have grown up in the shadow of Hollywood mansions or Silicon Valley boardrooms. I grew up in the shadow of factories that closed, neighborhoods that crumbled, and families that had to fight for every paycheck. And let me tell you something, that is real leadership training. Because when you've lived what most Americans live, you don't just talk about solutions, you understand them." The audience erupted, some cheers, some murmurs of approval. The stage had been set, and the clash was underway. The moderator quickly sensed the heat building and leaned in, eager to stir the pot. "Senator Vance, Governor Newsom suggests your background might not prepare you for the complexities of governing a nation. How do you respond to the idea that leadership requires more than experience in struggle?" Vance didn't hesitate. His voice grew stronger, his cadence deliberate, each word landing with force. "Struggle isn't a weakness, it's the foundation of strength. When you grow up watching your mom stretch a paycheck to cover groceries, when you see neighbors lose their homes to drugs and economic decline, you don't need a lecture on what America needs. You live it. Leadership isn't about sipping wine at a Napa fundraiser, it's about understanding the grit it takes to survive." The crowd broke into applause, some even standing. The camera caught Newsom's smirk faltering, just slightly. But the California governor wasn't about to back down. He leaned into his mic, voice smooth, dripping with dismissive charm. "Senator, it's a nice story, and I don't doubt your sincerity. But America's problems aren't solved by nostalgia for the factory floor. They're solved with innovation, global vision, and yes, sometimes with policies you can't dream up in a small-town diner. We live in a world where states like California lead the way, in technology, in climate action, in progressive ideas that move us forward. Ohio doesn't set the tone for the future. California does." The jab landed, sparking a wave of cheers from his supporters in the audience. The contrast was sharp, Newsom painting himself as the forward-looking visionary, Vance as the man clinging to a fading past. But Vance's expression hardened. He didn't flinch. Instead, he waited for the noise to die down, his hand resting lightly on the podium, eyes locked on Newsom. Then, with a measured tone that carried through the hall, he said, "Governor, you're right about one thing, California sets the tone. But let's talk about what that tone is. Homelessness skyrocketing in San Francisco. Families fleeing Los Angeles because they can't afford rent. Businesses leaving your state for Texas and Ohio because your policies crush them. If that's your vision of the future, then God help us all. The room gasped, then erupted. Supporters of Vance roared in approval while others booed loudly. The clash wasn't just personal now, it had become a battle of two Americas. The debate stage felt like a battlefield now. On one side, Newsom straightened his jacket, refusing to let his composure slip. On the other, Vance stood calm but unyielding, every word striking like a hammer against California's image of progress. The moderator, sensing the growing electricity in the air, leaned in once more. "Governor Newsom," he asked, "Senator Vance says California is driving families and businesses away. How do you respond to that charge?" Newsom leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he shot Vance a pointed smile. His voice was laced with sarcasm. "Senator, it's amusing to hear lectures about economic vitality from Ohio. California's economy is the 5th largest in the world. We create more innovation in a year than Ohio does in a decade. Families move here because they want opportunity, culture, and a future their kids can believe in. Maybe instead of criticizing us, you should be taking notes." The crowd erupted with applause, some laughing at the jab. The moderator glanced at Vance, who stood utterly still, his hands clasped on the podium. Then he leaned into the mic. "Governor, I've taken notes all right. Notes from the thousands of families who left California because they couldn't afford to live there anymore. Notes from the businesses that packed up and came to Ohio and Texas. Notes from the working-class parents who watched your state prioritize elites while ignoring their struggles." The room quieted, every eye fixed on him. He continued, voice firm but low, almost daring Newsom to interrupt. "You mock my roots, Governor. You say growing up in Middletown doesn't prepare me to lead. But here's the truth, my roots are America's roots. They're the roots of welders, teachers, farmers, truck drivers, the people who make this country run. If you think that makes me unfit, maybe the real problem isn't my background. Maybe it's your disconnect from reality." A hush fell over the hall before an eruption of applause broke the silence, louder this time, more sustained. Newsom's smirk froze into something tighter, less certain. The battle was no longer about policy. It was personal, symbolic, a clash between two visions of America, one born in the glitter of California, the other forged in the steel of Ohio. The cameras zoomed in on Newsom as he adjusted his tie, trying to reclaim the room. His voice came sharp, his words carefully aimed. "Senator Vance, let's be clear, California is not perfect, but our innovation drives the nation. From Silicon Valley to Hollywood, we shape culture, technology, and progress. You talk about leaving California, but let's not pretend Ohio is where the world looks for answers. The future doesn't run through Middletown, it runs through my state." His words cut deep, eliciting laughter and applause from his supporters. He leaned back, satisfied, as though he had boxed Vance into a corner. But Vance didn't waver. His jaw tightened, his eyes locked on Newsom with a steady glare. He leaned forward, his voice measured but resonant. "Governor, you just proved my point. You mock my town, you mock my neighbors, you mock the people who built this country with their bare hands. But here's the truth, the future doesn't belong to Silicon Valley billionaires or Hollywood elites, it belongs to the families working 2 jobs to put food on the table. It belongs to the welders, the farmers, the factory workers who've been ignored by leaders like you." The audience erupted into thunderous applause, louder than before. Even some who had cheered Newsom shifted uneasily, sensing the power in Vance's words. Vance pressed on, his voice rising with conviction. "You think leadership is about prestige, about headlines, about polished sound bites. I think leadership is about standing with the forgotten, fighting for the overlooked, and never mocking the roots that make America strong. So if you want to laugh at where I come from, go ahead. But don't be surprised when the rest of America laughs back at you. The hall shook with cheers, chants of Vance. Vance, rising from the crowd. Newsom tried to smile, but the camera caught the tightness in his expression. For the first time that night, the governor looked rattled. The debate was no longer just about politics. It had become a test of character, and Vance had just delivered a blow that landed harder than anyone expected. The moderators exchanged nervous glances as the crowd's energy surged, filling the debate hall with raw intensity. Cameras panned across faces, some glowing with pride at Vance's fiery defense, others tightened with disdain, rallying behind Newsom's polished rebuttals. One of the moderators cut in, trying to regain control. "Gentlemen, let's return to the issue at hand, America's future. Senator Vance, you've spoken about forgotten communities. Governor Newsom, you've highlighted innovation. But the question is, which path better prepares America to compete globally?" Newsom seized the opportunity, straightening with renewed confidence. "Look, America doesn't win the future by clinging to nostalgia. It wins by leading in renewable energy, artificial intelligence, technology, fields that California drives forward every single day. Senator Vance talks about roots, but roots alone don't feed a nation. Growth does. And growth requires vision." His words sparked cheers, the governor's cadence smooth and confident, drawing strength from the idea that California embodied progress itself. But Vance was ready. He leaned toward his mic, his voice low, cutting through the applause with deliberate calm. "Governor, you keep calling my story nostalgia. But what you call nostalgia is the daily reality for millions of Americans. They aren't dreaming about AI conferences in San Francisco. They're worried about whether they can afford groceries, whether their kids can walk to school safely, whether their jobs will still exist tomorrow. That's not the past, that's the present." The applause this time was deafening, coming from ordinary people in the audience who felt the sting of those words. Vance pressed harder, his tone rising with conviction. "You say California leads the way. But if California is the model for America's future, then that future is homelessness tents, skyrocketing costs, and families fleeing for better lives. If Ohio is nostalgia, then maybe America could use a little more of it, because in Ohio, we still believe in family, in hard work, in community. That's not backward, Governor. That's what holds this country together." The room erupted. Even commentators whispered to one another as cameras caught the flicker of unease in Newsom's eyes. For the first time, the polished California governor seemed unsettled. The audience wasn't just watching a debate anymore. They were watching two visions for America collide, and Vance's steady fire was beginning to outshine Newsom's glossy confidence. The moderator leaned forward, his tone cautious, sensing the air had grown thick with tension. "Gentlemen, we've heard about the past and present. But let's look ahead. If either of you were to shape the nation's future, what would be your first priority?" Newsom seized the moment. His smile returned, his voice slick and confident. "My first priority is simple: making America a leader again in clean energy and innovation. We can't cling to coal and outdated industries while China and Europe race ahead. California is already showing the way, and under my vision, America will reclaim its role as the global standard-bearer for progress." Applause burst from his supporters, his words ringing like a promise of a bold new tomorrow. He basked in the reaction, knowing the cameras were capturing his confidence. But Vance didn't wait long. His reply came sharp, steady, his voice carrying the raw edge of conviction. "My first priority, Governor, is restoring hope to working families. Not in Silicon Valley boardrooms. Not in Hollywood studios. In the homes of welders, farmers, teachers, and small business owners. Because while you're busy talking about a clean energy revolution, millions of Americans are wondering how to pay their electric bills today. Progress doesn't mean leaving families behind, it means lifting them up." The audience broke into applause so loud it nearly drowned out the moderator. Newsom's jaw tightened, his polished armor cracking. Then Vance leaned closer to the mic, his voice dropping, but each word striking like a blow. You want to talk about the future? Here's the truth: if the future looks like California today, sky-high prices, families fleeing, streets lined with tents, then America is in trouble. But if the future looks like the grid of Ohio, where people fight for their families and never forget where they come from, then America will rise. The hall erupted into a mix of cheers and gasps, the kind of raw electricity that producers knew would dominate every news cycle. Even the cameras caught Newsom's uneasy shift, his eyes narrowing as if he realized he had walked into a trap. The debate wasn't just a clash of visions anymore. It was a fight for the soul of America, and in that moment, Vance had turned the tide. The moderator, sensing the stakes had risen beyond policy points, posed a sharp question. Governor Newsom, Senator Vance argues that California represents decline while Ohio represents resilience. What do you say to Americans watching at home who feel left behind by your vision? Newsom inhaled slowly, flashing a practiced smile. His tone was calm, almost patronizing. Look, I understand frustration. But let's not confuse anecdotes with reality. California doesn't just lead America, we lead the world. People don't dream of moving to Middletown, Ohio. They dream of Silicon Valley, of Hollywood, of the innovation that flows from California's DNA. Senator Vance can cling to his nostalgia, but America moves forward, not backward. Laughter rippled from part of the audience. Newsom leaned back, confident that he had turned the room again. But Vance didn't flinch. He let the laughter settle, then leaned forward, his voice quiet but razor-sharp. Governor, there you go again, mocking, belittling, sneering at the very people you claim to serve. You think America is built on glitz, glamour, and headlines. But America isn't Hollywood, it's hard work. It isn't Silicon Valley, it's small towns. It isn't just about dreams, it's about the people willing to sacrifice everything to make those dreams real. The applause roared, drowning out the governor's smirk. The energy in the room shifted palpably. Vance's eyes locked on Newsom, his voice rising now. You laugh at Middletown. But Middletown is where steel fed this nation. Where families taught their children values. Where communities stood together when the world turned its back. If you think that makes them less American, then maybe the problem isn't with Ohio. Maybe it's with you. The hall exploded, cheers, whistles, chants. Newsom's confident smile cracked as he glanced around, realizing the audience had tilted. His attempt to belittle Vance had backfired spectacularly. For the first time that night, the California governor looked cornered. And Vance, calm but unyielding, had seized the moment. The moderators tried to keep control, but the atmosphere had turned into something raw, electric, unpredictable. The debate was no longer about policy papers, it was about identity, pride, and who truly spoke for America. Newsom leaned forward, his polished veneer cracking just slightly. His tone was sharp, defensive. Senator Vance, you act like Ohio is the heart of America and California is some kind of failed state. But the truth is, people still move to California because they know it's where opportunity lives. You can criticize all you want, but at the end of the day, people don't flee from success, they move toward it. It was a calculated strike, but Vance caught it with calm precision. He paused, letting silence hang for just a moment before responding. His voice was steady, his words sharpened like steel. Governor, you're right, people move toward opportunity. That's why families are leaving California in record numbers and moving to places like Texas, Florida, and yes, even Ohio. Because opportunity isn't found in sky-high rents and unsafe streets. It's found in communities where families can thrive, where values are honored, where leaders don't mock the very people who built this country. The crowd erupted again, this time even stronger. Chants of Vance. Vance echoed through the hall. Newsom shifted in his chair, visibly rattled. The camera zoomed in on his tightened jaw, his forced half-smile. The polished confidence that had carried him into the debate was cracking under the weight of Vance's unrelenting authenticity. Vance pressed forward, raising his voice just enough to carry over the noise. "You keep talking about where people dream of moving. I'll tell you this, no parent dreams of raising their children in a tent on the side of a California highway. No worker dreams of paying half their paycheck just to keep a roof over their head. And no American dreams of being mocked for the place they call home. That's the future you're offering, and the country deserves better." The hall shook with applause. Even some commentators in the press row were caught on camera nodding in agreement. For Newsom, the debate had slipped beyond repair. For Vance, it was a defining moment, the night he didn't just defend his roots, but turned them into a weapon sharper than any insult. The hall was electric now, the crowd's chants bouncing off the walls like thunder. Newsom, normally unflappable, was visibly frustrated. His hand tightened on the edge of the podium, his voice rising with forced energy. "Senator Vance, you can throw stones all you want, but facts matter. California's economy is the 5th largest in the world. We drive technology, culture, and innovation. You can't dismiss that just because you want to romanticize the Rust Belt." The words were sharp, but the delivery betrayed strain. The governor's eyes darted to the audience, hoping for cheers that didn't come with the same force as before. Vance let him finish, then leaned forward with a calm that felt almost surgical. His voice was steady, measured, and devastatingly precise. "Governor, you keep bragging about the size of California's economy. But let me ask you this, if California is so successful, why are families leaving in record numbers? Why are businesses packing up and heading for Texas and Florida? Why are middle-class families, once the backbone of your state, squeezed so hard they can't even afford to stay?" The applause exploded again, so loud the moderator struggled to bring order. Cameras caught the governor's forced smile, his polished lines failing to pierce the noise. Vance didn't stop. He pressed harder, his words coming with the force of conviction. "An economy that looks good on paper doesn't mean much if people can't live decent lives under it. It's like bragging about the size of a house while ignoring the fact the roof is caving in. California may be rich in statistics, Governor, but Ohio is rich in spirit, and spirit, not spreadsheets, is what built America." The crowd roared, commentators whispering that Vance had landed the blow of the night. Newsom looked cornered, his attempts at laughter coming off hollow. For the first time, his swagger seemed to falter under the weight of Vance's relentless connection to ordinary Americans. The camera zoomed in on Vance, calm, steady, unwavering. While the governor shifted uncomfortably, the roles reversed. The room wasn't just watching a debate anymore. It was watching Newsom unravel. The moderator raised his hand, his voice almost drowned out by the crowd. "Gentlemen, we're nearing the end. Each of you has one final chance to tell Americans why your vision is the right one for the future." Newsom leaned in first, his tone still polished but betraying urgency. "America deserves a future of progress, clean energy, global leadership, and innovation that inspires the world. Don't be fooled by nostalgia. We can't build tomorrow with yesterday's tools. My vision is forward, bold, and unafraid of change." The applause was polite, but thin compared to earlier. Newsom forced a smile, knowing it wasn't the thunder he had hoped for. Then Vance took his turn. His voice was steady, but carried the weight of every moment that had come before. "Governor Newsom talks about progress. But real progress doesn't mean leaving families behind. It doesn't mean mocking the people who built this country. And it sure doesn't mean running a state so badly that millions want to leave it." He paused, scanning the audience, then delivered the line that would echo far beyond the debate stage. "America's strength isn't found in fancy boardrooms or Hollywood studios. It's found in the grit of small towns, the loyalty of working families, and the belief that no matter where you come from, your roots matter. That's the America I'm fighting for. And that's the America that will rise again." The hall exploded into cheers, deafening, sustained. Newsom sat stiffly, his smile frozen as the cameras swung toward Vance, capturing the moment of triumph. Social media lit up instantly, clips of Newsom's mocking words spliced against Vance's fiery rebuttal. Hashtags trended within minutes, hashtag Vance vs Newsom, hashtag Roots Matter, hashtag The Future Fight. The debate had started as a clash of coasts and values. It ended with one man standing taller, not because of wealth or power, but because he never forgot where he came from. For Gavin Newsom, the night would be remembered as a stumble. For J.D. Vance, it was a defining victory, the night he turned mockery into momentum and silence into thunder.